Well lads, sorry, don't mind me. Just playing some Smash Bros right now. But, there's just so many characters, I'm not too sure who I want to play. Maybe I'll just pick whoever I find hot. You know what the most important part of a character-based game is? Picking one. Now, a lot of the time, it's quite simple. A 6-year-old Rory saw Kirby for the first time playing Smash Brawl at a friend's house and decided this would be who he plays in Smash every time. But when you get older, maybe your tastes change, or you know more specifically what you enjoy when it comes to characters and classes and such, meaning that finding the character that fits you can be a bit of an adventure at times, which sparked an idea in my mind. Why is it that we pick the characters that we pick? And I was thinking a little more beyond, oh, they're fun, so let me give an example from myself to set the stage. September 2017, a 12-year-old Rory went up to his dad with €40 in cash and began asking him to buy Overwatch. For the first 2 or so months, I didn't really have a character to main. In all honesty, I didn't even know what the word main even meant. I was just playing whatever and enjoying the game. In fact, I didn't even know why I enjoyed the game, I just did. And I could not place a reason on it. But in November, I actually did find a character that could have been called a main, Moira. She had just released, and the one and only reason I gravitated towards her was one simple fact. Ireland Mission! I couldn't believe it. Even now it's still cool to me because there are barely any Irish characters in games. At the very least, the ones I play, which are intended to have international casts even in the present day, I only know of 2 of them, and one of them is Happy Chaos. Níl sé seo ar arágain nuair a dúirmar daoine gurma, lads. Getting back to it, I wasn't even enjoying Moira an insane amount or anything. I was just playing her a lot because Irish character who actually spoke the language and spoke it correctly. I'd say that currently 70% of my Moira hours are from way back then when she released, just because Ireland Mission! Though a while after this, I tried Genji, who's been my most played character ever since. He made me realize what I enjoyed about Overwatch, the movement, how in control I actually felt while controlling the character and moving around, which he only takes further. Genji was my realization that I love speedy characters, ones with a lot of movement, which when looking at previous games I played, such as Mario 3D World, my favorite character in that game was Toad, who is the fastest. Though over the years I have realized that I enjoy speedy characters for more than just their actual speed. It was the same reason that I enjoy a lot of others. When playing a game, I like to be in the driver's seat. I like being able to be the proactive player and to make the first choice or engagement, which is why I like fast-paced characters, as they not only have fine-grained control in a literal sense, as in order to make a character that is fast, you first need to make them control well, but they also have it in a more metaphorical sense. Being faster than the enemy lets you control when things happen. It's why I also like Mei in Overwatch, a character with no mobility at all who can still control the battlefield by creating terrain to cut off enemies. It's also why I enjoy tanks and end up not being a massive fan of more passive supports. So there's a lot of different points to answer my own question of why within that story, so we may as well start with the most important one by far and the other idea that triggered this: representation. Alright lads, we're getting woke with this one, so I'm just going to make one thing very clear. I am very much a left-leaning person, so if you are someone who struggles with the basic language concept of pronouns, just click off the video. Or better yet, leave that angry comment for me, it'll help off the algorithm and I'll delete it later anyway. Because there's only one thing worse than a bigot, and it's a bigot who's a nerd. Moving on anyway, as you can tell from looking at me, I'm not a minority of any variety. Really, I mean straight, white, cis male, honestly, click randomize in The Sims and you'll probably come across me sooner rather than later. So what representation could I want anyway? Well, thinking about it, saying closest thing sounds quite stupid, but at best you can make the claim that, yeah, Irish people were once very oppressed. Or to use Moneyfolder's own words, well, I can't. Regardless, Irish is nearly never represented in games, and the times when the nationality actually is present, one of the only examples in my mind being Auntie Ethel from Baldur's Gate 3, the language is entirely absent. Toimen an Gaelga a lawrt, chun bheith mo conta is majara changa I, ach bhí mé ag fallum an changa nuair a raibh mé nach ach cuaig bliana dísh. Ach ag cibh man nuair bhfuil duine airnach ann, ní bhín an changa in aon oich bit, seachas le Moira. That was mostly to prove that I do in fact speak and care about the Irish language. Moira releasing just as I was getting into what turned out to be one of my favourite and most life-changing games was just really cool to me. She actually had proper Irish voice lines. I do wish at times that she sounded like a Kerry farmer just for my own amusement, but this was an accurate and well represented depiction of an Irish character. Sure, I had the tiniest of qualms. She wouldn't use the correct version of hello if you selected it after someone else had directed their hello at you, but the fact that was all I could really say, I think we can take the win. This is what I mean with representation matters. I am not a fucking minority unless we're counting a dying language as one, but just because I saw a character that speaks my language in a game I was playing, I thought Moira was cool as hell. Sure, as I got better at the game and discovered the kind of characters I really enjoy to actually play, I started playing her less. And in modern Overwatch, when it comes to her gameplay, she's got a lot more than just issues. But if me seeing that, just some Irish 12-year-old hearing Irish being spoken in a video game and thinking it's the coolest shit of all time, and starts playing the game more because of it, I think that really speaks to how important representation is. I was picking Moira for weeks, if not months, just because she's just like me for real. Yet, present day me doesn't really care about the art direction of a character. When I'm playing a game, I'm playing it to have fun. Case in point, League. Terrible sentence, I know, but listen. I have always loved Gwen's art direction in League. Her visual design, the voice, the sound effects, the skins. I loved all of it so much, but I could just never play her. She never clicked with me, I never enjoyed it. It's not that I don't value art direction, but it will never be the reason I play a game currently. I mean, I was in awe playing PixelRory Phantasy for the first time, just seeing how beautiful the game looked, because before I got a PC that could play games at decent graphics, this is what I would be looking at half the time. But if it weren't for the art direction of Moira, there's a chance that I may have never gotten as into Overwatch as I did, because the reason I picked Genji was because we needed a DPS in some random quick play game I was in and Moira was taken. So this entire first section has just been set up. When my idea was originally just thinking about why we pick the characters that we do, I asked some of my friends what led them to their character choices, and I got a variety of answers. From big explanations about what type of gameplay excites them, to single sentences saying that Giovanna Guilty Gear is hot. But shit, he's not wrong. But in all seriousness, I got about 3 primary responses, which to sum up in single sentences were, I saw their gameplay and thought it looked cool, I saw them and thought they were hot, and I had read their lore and I loved their story. But please know, they were far more than just sentences, which I'm more than grateful for. A 17-page document on why they like whichever Splatoon weapons that they do wasn't my expectation though. But for a moment, I want to focus a little bit on that second one, picking your character because you find them attractive. Now again, this isn't my own taste when it comes to picking who I play, see Gwen, but I do get it, especially if you're starting out for the first time. There's a huge cast of characters you know nothing about, so just pick whichever visual design pleases you the most. And I gotta stress, there's nothing wrong with this. A lot of my friends and Discord members told me that at least when they first started out, they just picked whoever they thought looked cute, cool, funny, whatever descriptor that they liked most in a character design, and as they played more, they branched out into characters that they actually preferred to play because they got more familiar with the game, though most still played the characters that they also happened to find hot. Obviously, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. What I find attractive about my girlfriend is something that others may not be into themselves, and naturally this goes into character designs as well. But there's one thing that I want to get into, but before that we need some setup. For a moment, I want you to take yourself, think about what games and characters you play, and think why you chose them. It could be a list from one game, it could be your most played from several, anything works. But the main things I want you to consider is your own gender, and the gender of those characters. And to be clear, no gender is obviously applicable. I did this for myself, and this was the list that I arrived at. And just to make my point clear, I asked a friend of mine to do the same herself, and I received this. As you can tell, there's quite the disparity, and in this case, the second category is what applies to her. She picks her characters based on how pretty she thinks they are, and I need to be clear, like I already have said, there's not a thing wrong with that logic. Pick the character that you will enjoy the most. If them looking hot is what you like, go for it. There's just a slight issue here. Not only in the logic behind my data for what I am about to present, but within the games themselves. First, if my point wasn't obvious by now, most women tend to play characters that are also women. Now, with my data, this point is baseless, stereotypical, and impossible to prove with just the info from 2 people. So instead, I found a study which researched this and data from a gaming company. Starting with a study on League, I'll also link it if you want to read it yourself, but let's take a look at page 311. In our interviews, the female participants expressed that the champion's appearance played an important role in influencing the champion choice, which is consistent with prior research. I prefer Sona because her appearance is attractive. I prefer female champions because they are good looking. One male participant also observed this gender preference. If you see supports using Nami, Morgana, and Sona, female champions, most are female players. But supports like Braum and Thresh, male champions, female players don't use a lot. Female players tend to use female champions, especially with good skins. However, no male participants have suggested that appearance affected how they choose their champions. Now, in all honesty, I have some issues with this study. Firstly, it was researched during 2016 and 2017, so certain info is outdated, and in my opinion, the gaming community was worse back then in terms of stereotyping women as healer-only players, and acting like men only play big, muscly murder machines. I mean, now they're just outright misogynistic, so really what changed? But the main piece of information from this study that I'm referencing has also been confirmed by a writer, Reeve. Now, I'm not thrilled to cite Reddit as a source, but this is where the comment was originally made, and far more recently at that. First, Reeve mentions how they reviewed the balance of female to male characters in the game a few years ago, which lines up with that 2016 to 2017 study, as these comments are from 2022. They noticed that the balance was about 60% male and 40% female. Over the years, they've been adding more female characters than male in order to balance it out. When accused of alienating half the player base by someone who probably thinks deodorant replaces a shower, Reeve stated that roughly 97% of female players only play female champions. So with the two of these, the proof lines up. Typically, and I need to stress, these are tendencies, not an absolute rule or anything of that sort, women prefer to play female characters, which can be assumed that is generally because female characters are made to conform to the most generalized beauty standards. And there's an issue that neither the study nor Reeve acknowledged, which is also a really important aspect of this whole topic: the actual designs. I can count on one hand, off the top of my head, male characters that aren't designed to appeal to the standard of most men. Male characters that are meant to look pretty instead of cool or strong, for a lack of better words. Lifeweaver in Overwatch, and Hui, Aphelios, and Rakan in League. Now, expanding out of PvP multiplayer games, this list starts to change and becomes a little bit more balanced, but in games which have a target audience of straight men, most male designs are made to be cool, strong, badass, and rarely ever gentle or cute. So in regards to the statistics above of women only playing pretty female characters, the context of the data needs to be considered. And when that study was done, only one of the League characters I listed was even released, so it was even worse back then, with barely any designs meant to actually appeal to women. If you take modern League, many of the female characters are said to have same face syndrome, which was a large point of contention around 2021 and 2022. Conventional thinking would lead to believe that the existence of these, let's put it bluntly, sexualized women, being to please the primarily male-dominated player base of competitive gaming. But the facts from the research and Riot themselves suggest otherwise, as flawed as the context of those facts are, which I have already stated. They suggest that, to put it bluntly once again, it's not entirely for the gooners. Now, there could be multiple reasons for these, but I really don't think that trying to please the most common denominator of cis men is one of them. They already have a hold on that market. They don't need to entice them in with massive honkers, and there's already the evidence that most men don't tend to care for the visual design of a character. I think this is, in all honesty, a failed attempt to secure a wider variety of the female market. They're following trends that they've seen work in their games. To leave League and have a different example, let's return to Overwatch. While there is no public information on this that I was able to find, most are aware of the generalization that Overwatch players who happen to be women play the more attractive characters. Mercy, Lifeweaver, Juno, Kiriko, Ashe, Widow, you get the idea. Both of these games continue the practice of adding characters reminiscent of their past attractive releases. Freya and Aurora are some of the newest characters in both games, and while Aurora has the excuse of quite literally being a bunny girl, many have said that looking at Freya reminds them of Widowmaker, at least in her face shape. The more things change, the more they stay the same. And in this case, it's truly the worst case. And to anyone who thinks that stuff like this doesn't matter because it doesn't affect gameplay, I believe that couldn't be further from the truth. First, the obvious, which I haven't actually gotten to yet, the homogenization in the visual designs of female characters on these rosters will more than likely push away women who don't play games, despite it being an attempt to actually hook them in. All because it will only further reinforce the ideas and stereotypes that games appeal strictly to the male fantasy. You know, in fairness, I do always visualize the man I want to become, so it does hold some truth. So by rejecting the female audience that they tried to secure, they do lower the potential variety that the game could see overall. But to be fair, this doesn't directly impact gameplay. Regardless, I still find it important to bring up. Second, and honestly the main point behind this, sits in both silhouette and gameplay design. A good character design can be recognized from silhouette alone, is a phrase I'm sure all character artists are more than aware of. And to drive this point home, let's take a look at Marvel rivals. Susan Storm, Dagger, and Emma Frost. First, the entire visual design of all three. We have a full 3 sets of tight clothing, blonde hair, and blue and white color schemes. Now let's take all the color and detail out so that we are just left with shape or their silhouette. And forgive me for how shaky these masks looks, Rivals has no green screen to make this easy. Now in this case, Emma Frost has plenty to differentiate herself. She's got a more muscular build, her cape helps give her more shape, and the shoulder spikes also add to this. You'll rarely confuse her for anyone else. These two are the same woman in different fonts. Until an ability is used or you see a black man appear where the white woman was, it can genuinely be difficult to tell which of the two you're looking at sometimes. Now in all fairness, Rivals is a source material that they need to work off, and comics are famously not the greatest when it comes to depicting women, but this was the best example to demonstrate. Having the same or even just too many similar body types across your cast can really damage visual clarity, especially since body types can be far more diverse in real life than you would expect when looking at any media. Not only is having diverse body types good for representation, but it does help you immediately recognize what character you just saw. Even in Overwatch, with many stating the similarities in how Freya and Widowmaker look, because of Freya's cape, she has a recognizable silhouette so you won't confuse them. It's a very important piece of the game, which clothing can save, but there are far easier solutions. And not only is it important visually, but it's important for creating the feel of a character. Think of what you expect a speedy character to look and control like. Obviously they'll be fast, but you imagine that they'd be quite small, frail, and light. There's far too many examples in my favorite genre of hero shooters alone. I mean Genji, Tracer, Maeve, Spider-Man, Octane, Neon. All these speedy characters have similar builds, being very skinny with not much on their bones at all. And this does result in a lot of these characters controlling very similarly. Not a bad thing, personally I love how tight their control feels, and this is what you expect, especially if you're familiar with something like boxing or really any form of martial arts in real life like I once was. Lightweights tend to be faster, even jittery in their movements, while heavyweights may not move as quick but hit much harder. It makes sense in our minds, and that's why it's translated as such into games. The hulking tank hits hard but struggles to get into range by themselves. The glass cannon dies immediately with any mistake, but has survivability in the form of how hard they are to hit thanks to their sudden movement changes. But why not give a heavier character some mobility as well? Turning bigger characters that we would expect to be slower into speedy characters like the ones mentioned above can have some incredibly fun results that bring variety to a game's control. My personal favorite example outside of a tank category would be Betty La Bomba from Paladins. She only has one movement ability in Explosive Personality, but with the cards and talents in Paladins, this can turn her into an extremely mobile yet still heavyweight character, which really gives her unique control that still feels fast. She's more about momentum rather than sudden dashes like a lot of speedy or even rushdown characters are, and it makes complete sense. Obviously anything of any size can build up momentum, but a larger object is going to have more potential momentum. The presence of different body types will make the gameplay have an even greater variety. Everyone wins. And just looking at Betty for a moment, lads, I don't want a damn soul to argue that bigger people aren't attractive. Use your feckin' eyes. And just to be clear, this applies to more than just female characters. It doesn't even matter what bloody species the character in question is. Having variety in what the characters are, whether it's humans, animals, robots, monsters, or the secret fifth option, all invite different types of gameplay. But with humans in particular, it's the most important since, You know, despite his wishes to join in when I'm playing, I'm pretty sure this isn't the target audience of any game. But there's another aspect of games that makes representation just as important, which I hinted at earlier: popularity. And nowhere else is this more apparent than Bridget from Guilty Gear. If I presented anyone with a picture of Bridget and then a picture of any other character from Guilty Gear, whether it's Sol, Kai, Pot, Abba, no matter who, odds are they're going to recognize Bridget, even if they can't place who she is or where she's from. I mean, I only got into Guilty Gear just over a year ago, and the only character I knew at all before that was Bridget. But why? If you were anything like me, you only found out about her from her popularity of Strive when she released around 2022. Your first thought would have been, oh, she's the trans girl from that game. After all, it was around 2020 when being trans started truly being far more accepted, so the newfound popularity of Strive from players who were completely unfamiliar with the Guilty Gear series, alongside the internet's realization that trans people are in fact completely regular people, meant that seeing Bridget, a character easily perceived as trans when looking at her story, as it's presented in Strive, means that she was shoved to the forefront of not even just the fighting game community and its rapid growth in 2020, but to the front of the internet as a whole. And this is good. I mean, honestly, Arc System Works as a whole has some brilliant trans rap in their games other than Bridget. Testament, who's also from Guilty Gear, and both Ladiva and Cagliostro from Granblue, all four are great additions to have in their respective games, is what I would say looking at it on a surface level. Now, I need to be clear, those three I just mentioned, nothing wrong with them whatsoever. Except for that one Testament I played when learning Strive for the first time, they were mean, but that's unrelated. When I finished the Dual Rulers anime, I was admittedly confused, knowing nothing about Guilty Gear lore, and I could tell that this anime was made for fans who actually knew and understood it. So I decided to read up a little bit on it myself, and I thought that my starting point should actually be Bridget, because I was really confused on why she had so much screen time in the show, meanwhile my goat Giovanna was nowhere to be seen. And what I learned is that more importantly than anything, good representation is what you need. Now, just as some clarification, I don't think it's a bad thing that Bridget is trans in Strive, and I wouldn't even dare suggest that she isn't in some process to disguise thinly veiled transphobia as knowledge of Japanese traditions or any shite like that. Arxies themselves have said that Bridget is trans, and that quite simply is the end of that. There is no argument to be had over it, but there are criticisms to be had. To start, we need to look at her lore before Strive. In Bridget's village, twins being born as the same gender was seen as a bad omen, meaning one of the children would have to be killed or at least given up. As a result, Bridget's parents decided to raise her as if she was a girl back then in order to protect her and her brother. Bridget's main story is how she left the village to become a bounty hunter and earn great achievements, as a method to prove to them that this gendered omen was entirely false. I view this as a story about gender, similar to Kanji's arc in Persona 4. Bridget's story to me is a story about proving how a man can present femininely, can have feminine hobbies or interests, and dress femininely while still being a man. Proof that no matter how society sees you or your interests, they don't change who you are. Because it's also important to know that Bridget holds no resentment over her parents' treatment. She loves them and her brother, and knew it was necessary in order to keep them safe. And it can easily be said that she enjoyed dressing and presenting like this. If she didn't, I believe she quite simply wouldn't have kept it up for as long as she did. And a man presenting as a woman, last I checked, this is very much still seen and welcome within the queer community. Just look at drag queens. And even then, drag is not gendered. Anyone can do drag, and anyone can be a drag queen. And this is where I have a slight issue with what her story in Strive brings. It brings in this idea that she identifies as a woman because she was raised as a woman, because she had to present as one all her life, which really is the antithesis of what the trans experience is. Many of my trans friends either have or currently are being forced to present the opposite of what they truly are. I know someone who identifies as a man, yet has to present as a woman if they wish to live because they can't support themselves yet. He is being raised as a woman, but this doesn't make him a woman. In the case of Bridget, again, I hold no issue with her being trans. Her story in Strive does leave indications as to why she is. Of course, there is nuance to this discussion, and like I've already said, Arc System Works has said that she is trans, so that is the end of that discussion, but I really wish it was just fleshed out a little bit more. It's more than plausible that she is trans. I know of many trans people who threw on a skirt as a joke and then realized that it was, in fact, not a joke. Bridget's story is about going against tradition, or even better put, acknowledging that tradition does exist, yet you are free to live and express yourself however you wish. I mean, look at her visual design, a nun with a massive shackle around her waist, yet it isn't restricting her or anything of that sort. Her visual design shows her story's message in its entirety. She acknowledges tradition by wearing the shackle, but she isn't shackled down by the tradition. But it is from this that the problem arises. Taking this story of going against tradition and saying she is trans because of it puts that story at odds with itself. A story about defying expectations fell to them. I know I've been repeating myself, but I just need to be clear with this. Bridget being trans is not a bad thing. Even though I think the writing of it is not the best, it is not a bad thing. There is nothing wrong with the destination, but the journey skipped about 7 turns. Bridget being trans could have fit into her story beautifully if it was just elaborated on a little bit more, if there was just a little bit more to it. It would have been beautiful, but instead it just seems more like she was made to be trans because it fit her, which again does go against her story unless it is fleshed out. In my opinion, Testament is actually the more accurate depiction of what the so-called trans experience is. They are non-binary, but it was only in Strive that they started being themselves. Testament did not live a good life, to put it ever so bluntly. They were kidnapped and forced to become a gear. After the war, they were lost, wandering aimlessly, not knowing what to do in life, and it wasn't until they met Dizzy, who is also a gear, that they learned to have hope and to love themselves. And looking at Testament's design through the games, you can see the acceptance happen, going from presenting quite masculine and androgynous in early games to quite feminine in Strive, which fits beautifully into the experience of many NB people. There's an expectation that non-binary people have to be androgynous, but why? Just because they don't identify as a man or a woman? Both women and men can present as the opposite of what people would expect, so naturally non-binary people should be able to as well, regardless of what others think. Clothes have no gender. Yes, a dress is seen as feminine, but why is it wrong for a man to wear one? Because he should be masculine? And even bringing this idea towards a trans person is a complete insult as to what it means to be trans. That's why Testament's story is so beautiful, and in all honesty, Bridget's is as well, though hers has just a few holes like I already said. But as representation for trans people, these two characters are incredible. Even with the issues I have with Bridget's writing, I mean, it's better than a certain game which slapped a sexuality onto a character and proceeded to do nothing with it for years. The fact that the trans depictions within Guilty Gear are so good really boosted its popularity, especially with Strive, though whether that's for better or for worse depends on how far you have a stick shoved up your arse. But like I just hinted at, you really need good representation. At best, if it's just alright, no one notices it. And at worst, if it's bad, it will make the people who are supposed to identify with the character avoid them entirely. Just look at Soldier 76. Between the confirmation of his sexuality in 2019 until about early to mid 2025, there was next to nothing in the game indicating he was gay. No voice lines, no new story drops. He had a banner and icon released around Pride, which in fairness is great to have, but for the love of God lads, to anyone looking in without the context, it really does look like the label was slapped on and forgotten about. Now this year, he not only got a voice line interaction with Bap, which flat out says that he is, but he also got a full-on comic showing his story. Even with these though, Soldier is a case where I highly doubt people are picking him because they relate to him. If anything, I'm pretty sure he's got some of the most homophobic players, but once again, that's a bit of a different discussion. And adding on in the good and bad rep, you need to keep in mind how it's written is really important. If it's just slapped on, it'll be seen as lazy and just a corporate attempt to seem like an ally. If it's overemphasized, you'll make it seem like the character is nothing but their race, sexuality, gender, disability. Whatever it is that you're trying to represent should never be the focal point. If anything, if we can get to a point where it's just a detail about the character and no one makes a big deal over it, that will be great for everyone, because honest to God, I'm tired of Twitter. The reason I went off on such a tangent from the original premise of why we pick characters is because, in all honesty, a lot of other creators piss me off. You'll see them say that rep is important, yet they won't take the extra 2 minutes to give the reason, and I've barely scratched the surface of it. I mean, I didn't even get into disabilities, whether it's visible or invisible ones. It's always a mixed bag when it comes to how they're done. On the one hand, or lack thereof if I may, there's a lot of amputee characters in games. Mechanical arms or legs, missing eyes. Really, pick a body part and you'll probably find a character with a mechanical replacement for it. And these, I rarely see anyone have an issue with because it's always done fairly well. It'll be mentioned in their story, and sometimes it contributes significantly to their gameplay, which does make things more interesting. I mean, Nintendo announced in their big Switch 2 Direct a few months ago a basketball game, Drag X Drive, with all the players in wheelchairs. And I will flat out say it, this is so much more interesting than any traditional sports game ever will be because of its use of a disability. And it's also great to have a game like this, especially on a Nintendo system which typically have younger audiences. A child in a wheelchair may see this game and it could really act as a confidence boost that there's nothing, in quotes, wrong with them. But on the other hand, sometimes nothing is done with it. Lee Sin in League is blind, but nothing in his gameplay reflects this core element of his story and character. If anything, Rek'Sai is a better blind character as she incorporates that element into her gameplay. The details of a character with a disability should always have some way to make it into their gameplay if possible. So to cap it all off, why do we pick the characters that we pick? Well, for a large part of the gaming population, it does depend on how well they relate to the character. In other words, do they feel represented? And for the other part, I just think he's neat. Sunny! 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 Psst, psst. Sunny! Look, over here! Treat! 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 Sunny! Sunny! Sunny, look at me! Sunny! 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 Look, over here! Over here!
I'm on a mission, routing up whatever it is I gotta do, routing up.